Hey guys, I'm Amit Kumar and welcome to this video in which we are going to talk about primitive data types. This is part 1. So Apex primitive data types include Blob, Boolean, date, datetime, decimal, double, ID, integer, long, object, string, and type. All primitive data types are passed by value. So generally there are two types of passing with functions or within methods, which are known as passed by value or passed by reference. Even when we are assigning a value to a variable of a specific data type, we actually assign it by passing a value or by passing a reference. So if we talk about primitive data type, it's always passed by value. That means whenever you are assigning a primitive data type to another of the same type or compatible one, you are actually copying the value of one into the other. So you will understand it in more detail, but right now just try to remember that primitive data types are passed by value. All Apex variables, whether they are class member variables or method variables, are initialized to null. Whatsoever variable you are going to create in Apex, they are always initialized to null if we don't initialize them. Make sure that you initialize your variables to appropriate values before using them. As I told you, if you are not going to initialize Apex variables, they would be by default null. So make sure before using them, you have initialized them. Now the first data type is Blob. Blob is actually collection of binary data stored as a single object. So the basic purpose or the basic use of blobs is to accept as web service arguments. Basically for any data stored in a document or any data sent as attachments. So these things are quite beyond the syllabus of this course. So that's why we are not dealing with Blob right now. The second primitive type is Boolean. Now a Boolean is a value that can only be assigned true, false or null. So we can create a Boolean variable with the help of Boolean data type, and we can assign true, false or null to it. And definitely with the help of system.debug statement, we can print that value. The next data type is date. Date is value that indicates a particular day. To create a date, we always use system static method. We can't directly assign date values. We use system static method to create date values. We can add or subtract an integer value from a date value. And whensoever we will add or subtract an integer value, it's going to return a date value. So suppose we add 2 to a specific date, it's going to add 2 days to it. Addition and subtraction of integer values are the only arithmetic functions that work with date values. You can't do multiplication or division. We can't perform arithmetic functions that include 2 or more date values. So we can't add one date to another date. All that you can do is add an integer to a date. Now, as I told you, we use a static method, and to create an instance of date, the new instance static method is used. It is of date class, so we will call it as date.newInstance, and we pass year, month and day as parameters to the new instance method. This method returns a date, and that we can assign to any date variable. Datetime. Now datetime, a value that indicates a particular day and time, such as any specific timestamp. Always create datetime values with a system static method, just like a date value. We can add or subtract an integer or even a double to a date value, returning a specific date time. Now, addition and subtraction of integer and double values are the only arithmetic function that work with datetime. We can't perform arithmetic functions that include 2 or more datetime values. Definitely you can't perform arithmetic operation on datetime themselves. Now, just like a date, we have a new instance method of datetime class as well. Here we pass year, month, date, hour, minute and second. The next data type is decimal, a number that includes a decimal point. Decimal is an arbitrary precision number. That means it's not specific, it varies and there is no guarantee about it. currency fields are automatically assigned to the type decimal. So if you are going to create currency fields in your Salesforce org, definitely they are automatically assigned to the type decimal. If we do not explicitly set the number of decimal places for a decimal, the item from which the decimal is created determines the decimal scale. Now decimal scale means the number of digits in the decimal place, and if we don't set it explicitly, now there is a method with help of which we can specify how many decimal places should be there, but in case if we don't specify it, then it depends on the item from which we are creating the decimal. Now scale is a count of decimal places, and set scale method is used to set that decimal scale. Now if the decimal is created as part of a query, the scale is based on the scale of the field returned from the query. If you are querying some record, suppose it's a currency, so it depends on the scale of the currency. The decimal scale will depend on the scale of the currency. Now if the decimal is created from a string, the scale is the number of characters after the decimal point in the string. If the decimal is created from a non-decimal number, the number is first converted to a string. Scale is then set using the number of characters after the decimal point. So it totally depends from where you are getting the value of the decimal. The scale depends on it. Now clearly we can create a decimal value as you can see in the example over here, and here you can see in the second debug we have used the set scale method to set number of decimal places to 2, and definitely it's going to truncate the rest of the decimal places from the value. Now the next one is double. Double is also a kind of decimal point number where the decimal data type is having more precision than the double. So definitely the range of decimal is more than the range of the double. Double have a minimum value of -2 to the power of 63 and a maximum value of 2 to the power of 62. Scientific notations, that is exponential values in double, is not supported. Though we have that support in Java, but we don't have that in Apex. Now clearly you can create a double variable and assign value to it and print that value. There is no method to set the decimal places in double. Now the last data type for today's discussion is the ID. Now each object in Salesforce is having different records, and all the record is having a specific identifier, which is the ID. Now generally ID is represented in 18 characters in Lightning platform, but we can set it to a 15 character value as well. So if we set ID to a 15 character value, Apex automatically converts the value to an 18 character representation. All invalid ID values are rejected with a runtime exception. So if you are specifying any invalid ID, then a runtime exception will occur. That means when you will run the program, when the program is in execution mode, then the program will stop abruptly, showing you an exception. Here you can see we are specifying an ID, and the point to note is every time ID is specified in single quotes just like a string. So it's pretty much of talk about various primitive data types. Now it's time to see the things practically. So guys, here we are in our org with our developer console. So let's get started. So the first class we are creating is for Boolean, so I'm naming it as Boolean program, and let's create a simple method over here like public static void show, and inside this method I'm going to create a Boolean variable, so Boolean, and I'm giving it a name as Boolean variable. Now Apex follows the camel case where it starts with lowercase and every new word attached to it is having the first character as in uppercase. So this is the camel case. Now we can specify a value true to it, and as I told you, if you won't specify any value to it, it will be by default null. So let me just print this value in debug, and definitely we can create a debug statement where we are concatenating the value with a string. Now the program is ready, and to run this program you have to go to debug, open execute anonymous, and here you have to specify the class name along with the show method. So I'm just copy pasting it, and let's click on execute. Now here's the log entry, and let's click on the debug only. So clearly you can see it's printing the Boolean values over there where we are specifying the value, and here we are concatenating it. Now the next program will be for date values, so I'm giving it a name as date program, and let me quickly add some code. Now as I told you, to create a date value we need to use a static method, so that I'm using of the date class, so date dot, and the method name is new instance, and you can see you have to specify year, month and date to it. So let's specify that, and now we can use the debug statement to print the value. So I have used a debug statement. Now let's debug the program. So here you can see it's specifying the date. By default, Apex use time also whensoever you are using a date variable or a date time variable. But with a date variable, the time is always going to be 000 for hour, minute and seconds respectively. Now the next data type is datetime. So let's create a class for it. And here we will use datetime class for calling the new instance method. There are plenty of versions of it, but the most used version is where you are specifying year, month, date, hour, minute, second. So as you can see, I have used the system.debug statement. Here I am not only printing the datetime variable value, but I am also performing an arithmetic operation of adding 2 to this value. So let's see what's the output. And now you can see the first value is 25th of April 2022 and the next value is 27th of April 2022, where it had added 2 to it. Now interestingly, we can add a decimal or a double value as well. So suppose if I add 2.5, so what will happen? It will add 2 days, which is the integer value. It will add 2 days and it will add 0.5 days. Now 0.5 days means 12 hours. So let's see what's the difference. So now you can see that there is a 12-hour difference. Right now the time is 3:57, which we have specified over there, and when it added 12 hours to it, so this was 3:57 PM, that's why it's 15:57, and it is 3:57 AM, so it had added 12 hours to it. And because of adding that 12 hours, the date also changes by 1 day. Generally by adding 2, it will be 27th of April, 3:57 PM, and when you will add 12 hours to it, it will become 28th of April, 3:57 AM. Now the next data type is decimal. So let's create a program for it. Now as I told you, we can call the setScale method. So let me call that setScale method, and here I am passing the scale as 2. So let's run the program. So now you can see it's the first value which I have specified over there, and here's the second value where the setScale is setting the scale to 2 decimal places. Let's move to the next program, which is for double. Let's add some code to it. Here you go. And now, as I told you, there is no setScale method. If you'll try to add any setScale method to it, definitely when you will compile the program, it will show an error as there is no setScale method for double. So let's remove it and let's run the program. And here you go. Now the last data type is ID. So let's create a program for it. So guys, here I created 2 ID variables to show you the 15 character and 18 character IDs and how Apex converts it. So to get the ID, you have to go to your org. So here we are in our org, and let's open any specific record. So I'm using an account for it. So just click on this app launcher button. Type in accounts, click on it, and when this accounts list view will open, you won't see any record for the first time. So just click on this recently viewed and click on all accounts. Now here you can click on any specific account. So let's pick this Edge Communications. Now when any specific record is shown to you, you can fetch the ID from the URL. So if you'll see the URL is having this ID over here. Now basically this is 18 character ID. So if I will copy it and go to my developer console, I can definitely paste this ID. Now I'm converting it to a 15 character ID, and how we can do that? By removing the last characters. Don't remove characters from the beginning, remove characters from the end. So I'm removing the last 3 characters. Now it is a 15 character ID. And let's see what's the value of both these ID variables. So now you can see both the IDs are same, as Apex converted a 15 character ID to an 18 character ID. So guys, that marks the end of this video. See you soon in the next video. Till then, thank you and take care.